All right, everyone. It's been a wonderful session so far. That's a powerful, impactful, really presentation to have started with. Now we're going to go into a panel discussion. And this is about understanding how people's responses to communications have changed as a result of COVID-19 and digital fatigue. We've got a number of people here on the call who will be joining us on this panel. The first is Alice McKinnon, who's Head of Communications for the National Transport Commission. Now, Alice is, as you would know, the NTC actually really is a national land transport reform agency with a unique role to harmonize Australia's road, rail, intermodal transport systems. And with communications, marketing, and engagement experience across government and private sector, Alice has actually delivered innovation and change programs across digital portfolios, branding, internal comms, and stakeholder engagement. Next up, we also have Judy Shaw, who's Communications Director for the Commercial Radio Australia. She promotes the industry in Australia. She works across media regulation, consumer and trade PR, radio ratings, radio app, podcasting, and the Australian Commercial Radio Awards. Judy has also held positions in a range of global organizations, and this includes Visa Incorporated as their Head of Corporate Relations for Australia, New Zealand, and South Pacific. She's also held roles in HSBC Bank and Tourism Australia. So she's well qualified and completely experienced across different industries. I'm looking forward to these insights that are coming. Followed by, last but certainly not least, Caitlin Collins, who is Head of Communications for the very famous platform 99 Design that I myself have used at one point. From London and Stockholm to New York and San Francisco, Caitlin has actually spent the last decade in helping brilliant founders and startups shape and share their stories. With former clients, including the likes of Dropbox, Square, Prosper, and Seek, she's currently Head of Comms for 99 Designs, works with a talented team of marketers across global PR, corporate comms, and brand campaigns. Hello, ladies. It's lovely to see all of you. Good morning.
Good morning.
Now, I know that people will have questions and they're going to be popping it into the chat as we go along. So please do, because the whole benefit of a panel discussion is really to pick the brains of these amazing communicators that we have today at our disposal. And I'll get right into the meat and potatoes of it, really. And the first word really is that we've seen that the last 12 months have been really challenging for a lot of professional communicators, as well as so many other people. And Edelman really highlighted this in regards to the trust and information bankruptcy, not to mention the digital fatigue that we're seeing and some of the other key pieces of data that it's coming out in reports. Can each of you really tell us a bit of what you're seeing in your industries and workplace? Maybe Judy, can you kick us off on this? What are you seeing so far?
So we're seeing that uncertainty related to COVID really accelerated a lot of trends that we've always been seeing already. First is the increasing digitization of media, the need for speed. People wanted information very quickly. There was a lot of uncertainty and businesses were pivoting very quickly. 1 minute they were open, 1 minute they were shut. They needed that flexibility of being at market very quickly. In radio, we saw a 25% increase in the number of people listening to radio via mobile phones. We saw a 27% increase in people listening via PCs and tablets, and a 58% increase of people listening to radio via smart speakers. So alongside that increased access and that growth in streaming, the expectations also rose that information would need to be able to be received very quickly. So, with radio stations, in some days they were getting an advertising brief and turning around and getting an ad on air the same day. And for communicators, that meant vastly shortened lead times. So for us, we usually are faster than marketing. So we need to get those messages out even more quickly to the marketplace. And I think that was the main challenge for us, having to be very responsive.
I think that's actually a part of the challenge that so many organizations are facing, right? Not only the speed, but really even the last session when we were just speaking with Nick about grappling with a pandemic while we ourselves as individuals are facing this crisis and our teams are in the middle of a crisis. And that is no small feat. Alice, can you add on to this? How about you? How are things over at the NTC or in your industry?
Yeah, absolutely. I guess from our perspective, it's just absolutely modernized the way we engage with our stakeholders, both internally and externally. You know, our organization went from completely face-to-face engagement, both with staff and also stakeholders, to purely online. So in particular, it was a really steep learning curve for our colleagues to design experiences for online. And, you know, to start with, there were a fair few teething issues around, you know, you don't just kind of convert what you do in a meeting room to online. And that was quite interesting to see the cohort have to upskill, you know, really quite quickly in that space. I mean, we're Melbourne based and we're still working from home 11 months on.
Right.
So this is very much our new normal and next normal. I think McKinsey coined the term. So we're certainly looking to just expand the way we do things in that way. I guess the other interesting thing from a government perspective is that agencies of course had to redeploy resources to elsewhere, and that's meant that it's made it quite difficult for reform, because where we've often had a captive audience, we have agencies that are working elsewhere, and so being able to coordinate that has been a really big challenge.
And I actually that's an interesting point. I think this perfectly segues into Caitlin's industry, because you have so many people who are part of the design industry, for example, and you know, the freelance industry and agencies who have had remote workforces for a while. Caitlin, what were you seeing over on your end?
Yeah, absolutely. So obviously it was very much testing us all on a personal level and a professional level as a team. But it's interesting for our community specifically. For anyone who doesn't know, essentially 99 Design is a platform that lets small businesses hire freelance graphic designers online. So in a way, we kind of had a head start because our community's worked this way for 13 years. So it's been really interesting to see everyone else almost catch up with that. And so one thing that we did really notice is our designers started noticing that client communication was improving quite dramatically over the past 12 months as everybody got used to having to work online and write things down better as well, which is fascinating. So there's some silver linings to the challenges for sure.
Practice makes perfect, right? But Caitlin, just to add on to that, there's something that I did notice myself, and having come and own an agency where, yes, a lot of our workforce is remote as well, and we've been doing it this way for a very long time. We did find that there were significant differences in expectations of communication as people were grappling with the new work from home. I don't know whether it was like this in Australia, but it certainly was like this in Malaysia. People sort of lost track of office hours in that sense. Everything just went blurry. And suddenly you would get messages at 8, 9, 10, and it was perfectly normal and you were expected to respond, but you were also in that difficult position of, we need to separate work and, you know, and life, or else we're going to really burn out considering the circumstances. Did you see this at all?
Yes, I think we did. For the people who maybe weren't working like this, certainly within our own teams, we all, I think, got a little bit carried away. Certainly at the beginning, to be honest, it was like, okay, we need to calm down or we're going to have some serious health problems going on. So we actually in many ways could learn from our freelancers and our designers who are very good at setting themselves limits and hours and just, you know, making sure their time zones are displayed on their emails and that kind of thing. That can really help in terms of setting expectations as well.
I won't be surprised if out of this we find more and more people carrying dual SIMs after this, because you need to be able to shut off. And that brings us actually to digital fatigue, because we know that this is a real thing. Being zoomed out is an actual term now. You know, it's something that we wouldn't have heard in the past. Just early last year, that's not a thing, and now it is. So do you ladies have tips on how organizations and brands can actually manage and combat digital fatigue when communicating with customers or even employees? Judy, maybe you can kick us off on this one. What would you say? Any suggestions, any recommendations?
Yeah, look, I think some of the studies have shown, you know, up to 1 in 2 consumers actually want to have time away from their phones. But the reality is they actually can't turn off. So, you know, they're actually always on there. What we're seeing is a trend from reading and writing and text messages to more audio forms of communications, because you don't have to be looking or holding your phone, and it's a less intense focus on the screen. So, you can listen to a podcast, you can talk to Siri or Alexa for information, and it's not quite as an intense phone experience. So I think more brands are starting to investigate opportunities in the audio space. It's still quite an early stages. About 1 in 5 homes have a smart speaker at the moment. And the same with podcasting. It's still relatively new, but we're finding that people who do listen to podcasts tend to listen to, maybe 4 to 6 a week. So once you do start listening to podcasts, you become quite a fan of them. I think in the US, it's up to 37% of the population has listened to a podcast in the last month. So they're slightly ahead of us there in terms of the podcast trend. I've sort of found, in my own experience, I'll find my daughter, who is Gen Z. She is now, instead of sending 10,000 text messages with her friends, sometimes they are now recording short audio messages and leaving them for each other. And I said to her, why are you doing that? Always trying to find out what these Gen Zs are doing. And she said it's easier than texting, but you don't have to be there and you can look at it when it suits you. So I think that's an interesting sort of development that they're just naturally doing themselves. And I think, talking and listening is intuitively an easier way to communicate than writing.
Absolutely. And I think actually, just to add on to that, just the fact that the Clubhouse app has come out now, so many people are using it on their iPhones. It's the first time you're communicating with strangers on voice. And I'm really curious as to whether that would have flown as successfully as it has pre-pandemic, because before that we were like, just text me when you need me, and after that, I'll respond when I can. But now it's interesting. It has shifted so drastically. Alice, how about you? What were your challenges, and maybe how was your approaches with dealing with digital fatigue in your customers and your employees?
Yeah, thanks, Kristy. I think the biggest challenge at the beginning was just it was a novelty. We had TikTok, we had House Party. I speak a little bit more personally with staff, of course, but there was just this appetite for FaceTime and doing all this kind of stuff. And then, we fell very much in a bit of a heap and have had to really reassess the way we do things, and also being quite deliberate in, rather than calling for the sake of, and having that FaceTime, which is really, really quite exhausting. And I read interesting research around the sort of cognitive dissonance there, that you intellectually know that you're with someone, but you're physically not with someone, and that's actually really quite fatiguing. So I guess from a personal perspective, with managing staff, we've made a real effort to stop a lot of that FaceTime, to still have the conversations, like Judy was talking about, more of the audio interactions, but going for coffee on a call, but obviously around your own neighbourhood. So still having the connection without necessarily having to present and have, I know it's not necessarily formal, the conversations are often quite casual, but there is a formality in it and a sort of a deliberateness about doing those calls online. So that's something we've tried to do. And I guess from a stakeholder perspective, or customers for this audience, we really have just been conscious of asking how people want to get involved, and not making those assumptions, and not just diverting straight to a workshop or a meeting online. So constantly reviewing and refining approaches, and also looking to collaborate with other agencies that are already doing things well, rather than starting from scratch, whether it be webinars or podcasts. They've already got a great audience. Why wouldn't we piggyback off that, rather than trying to start from ground zero and adding noise, I guess, to an already pretty busy digital landscape?
Actually, and that's a key thing that I think a lot of people also found, because had we planned for the pandemic in advance, the budgets we would have proposed are very different from the budgets that we actually had. But Caitlin, how are you seeing digital fatigue and brands handling this in your industry? Because you have such a bird's eye view on so many different industries, right?
Yeah, exactly. So as a product, we struggle. I mean, we're always going to be tied to screens. That's just the visual kind of work that we're doing. But One thing that we did notice with clients using the platform and a lot of different brands, so across lots of industries, was a real focus on kind of amping up packaging and things that were going to end up in people's homes, because suddenly anyone working in retail or, you know, e-commerce normally, but that's the only brand touch point that you're going to have with a person. And it's the only thing they're going to touch and kind of interact with, which I think was a really interesting development that I don't see going away very soon. And then in terms of internal, just one tip which I found super helpful, and I don't know if everyone else knew this months ago, but you can turn off self-view in Zoom, so you don't see yourself on calls. And oh my God, it makes such a difference, honestly.
Oh, okay. I have to give that a try. I can't imagine myself just feeling far more relaxed, but paranoid at the start. Yeah,
it's like you do have to check what you can see in the background before you dial in, but other than that, it does make a big difference.
Oh gosh, I will absolutely give that a try. But to continue from that, in regards from now, customers probably to staff and employees, how are we dealing with maintaining internal engagement with staff following, you know, the extended periods of work from home? A lot of people are talking about the differences now that have really been exacerbated between the introverted personalities versus the extroverted personalities. That, oh, when we go back to work, it'll be the people who are more extroverted that'll be keen to go back into the offices, and this will not necessarily be true for everyone. What are you seeing, Alice? Any comments on this?
You almost had a word perfect, what you just said there, those word perfect conversations internally the other day, because, you know, our agency, you know, is full of introverts, you know, really smart people who are busy head down doing reform and research and whatnot. So, you know, it's been an interesting challenge, actually, maintaining engagement online. You know, we have had a number of staff meetings where, you know, it's just crickets, really, because people want to take the time to think about the questions and the discussions, absorb it, digest it, and come back and engage in conversation. So yeah, very much not assuming a one-size-fits-all approach to connecting with your team and your organization, even if it's small. We're an organization of only 40 people. And yeah, it's really starting to pinch, I guess, 11 months now of working from home and having finding ways to create those ad hoc and spontaneous opportunities for conversation and collaboration when you're used to doing that around the office. But I guess too, from our perspective, you know, we've just tried a lot of different things, whether it be video, whether it be polls, quizzes, social stuff, and really just asking the question every time: did that hit the mark? What more do you need to be? What, you know, what more do you want to see in order to make this work? So I don't necessarily have the answer, but we're still trying 11 months on to mix it up and keep people engaged.
Alice, I was expecting you to fix all our problems today. This is not going the way I planned. But no, in all seriousness, Caitlin, what about you? You know, because I know that you mentioned that you already had teams working remotely for a long time. What did you do to actually just continue good habits?
Yeah, so similar to Alice, we have had to try different things over the past year, because even with having teams across Melbourne, Berlin, Oakland, it's just difficult. It's hard, and things changed over the past year as everyone got a bit tired. We've also been hiring like mad, so we've had an awful lot of new starters, which has added certainly a layer of complexity to the whole situation, because obviously, you know, someone has no connections at all. It's harder to form them remotely first, and we're a pretty tight-knit team anyway, and so it has definitely been a challenge trying to get new people involved and not feel left out. So we've tried a ton of different things, events, that kind of thing. But one of the most useful ones that's kind of stuck the course is a tool called Donut, spelt the American way. And it's just a Slack integration, and it matches people up to have a coffee together, so across the organization. And then you can opt in, you can opt out. If someone can't make it, so some people do them by Zoom and have coffee. Other people, they don't really want to dial into a video call, but there are prompts for conversation starters. And so the idea is it's completely non-work chat and just trying to sort of replicate water cooler moments, essentially. And that one's worked pretty well and been fairly popular. So that was cool. We'll probably keep that up, actually.
Yeah, because I do see that people want to know what is time commitment going in, right? Because it's unfortunate, but that's what our calendar has become. we're ruled by our agendas at the moment, just because even Zoom calls are generally 1 hour back to back to back, and people are now trying to reduce that to 45 minutes just so that they get like a 15-minute break before the next thing, because you're not getting those hallway breaks. You're just going in one into the other into the other. But I'm very curious whether there's any unexpected benefits from remote work. And Judy, maybe you can come in on this one. You know, have you seen any good things, positive things, really?
Yeah, look, I think it's really sort of blurred those lines, which I think between work and personal life, which it may be positive or negative, but, you know, previously we've gone from that sort of news reader, you know, you've got to be professional at the top with the pajamas down the bottom, and you wanted to keep up that pretense of being professional. But, you know, when they had that BBC child incident where, you know, the professor of Korean studies came in and his sort of babies came into the room, I think that sort of stuck in people's psyches that it's okay to be human. And I think that's continued on. So I think the benefit now that everyone has those tools, which are pretty amazing, and everyone is much more accepting that, you know, you're not necessarily in an office. You know, for instance, you know, I had to dial in. It was actually my day off, and I had to dial into a committee meeting, and it was only a 15 minutes just to update them. But I had to like just find a cafe, found a nice quiet spot, set up my little phone, and I was able to share my screen with the presentation and give the quick update. And that was brilliant. I just thought, you know, all I needed, I didn't even need a laptop, was my phone. All the different participants could see the screen, and it was very intuitive. So, you know, you don't need to be a tech expert. And, you know, in the past, I probably would have said, oh, look, I don't think I'm available for that, just because I didn't want to appear unprofessional, beaming in from a cafe. But, you know, today it's much more acceptable. You can achieve what you need to do and then go on with your day.
In fact, I think people are looking forward to seeing different backgrounds or even different environments, because it's almost a comment like, where are you? That looks amazing. I need to add that cafe to my list.
The thing is, my daughter, who won't appreciate me talking about her, but she works for one of the big 4 consulting firms, and she was on a call with a partner at our dining table. And my son, who's in uni, sort of ran across the background singing, and like in his boxer shorts, grabbing a tin of tuna from the pantry, and the partner goes, "Who was that?" And I think we've all had those incidents. But the next time he was on the call, he said, "Oh, how's your brother going?" I remember those old days.
I love that she acknowledged who he was, because I almost thought of that Penguins from Madagascar. Maybe I'm the only one who has seen this animation, but the part where he goes, "You didn't see anything." But Alice, what about you? How are you seeing things over at in your industry? Any unexpected benefits? I mean, we know that, you know, flexible working hours are great and things like that. Any unexpected ones though?
Yeah, I guess it probably stands to reason, but at the time it seemed a bit unexpected. But I guess there's just a bit more equity in the way in engagement approaches, I guess, for external stakeholders. We are a national organisation and have largely travelled to have consultations with people. So they're now able to have a seat at the virtual table, so to speak, rather than having to travel. And, you know, I think of counterparts in WA or NT and sometimes, you know, in Tasmania as well, where they haven't been able to travel for cost or availability. And now they can very much participate as much as they want, which has been fantastic. I guess internally, and again, pretty obvious, but the rapid take up of tools by necessity has been great, because where people have probably been a bit reluctant to do things, you know, through Teams or Zoom or whatever else, or Slack, it's been fantastic to see people have to jump on board and just go with it, and has led a lot to a lot more of that more human, more casual forms of interaction, particularly with internal comms, which has been great for our organisation.
Right. I really like that. And actually that transitions really nicely into the next question about how our organizations have actually responded to employee and customer expectations of increased flexibility and agility. it was a time, and it is a time still for many people in many countries, where, for example, just the fact that the banks have to close early or can't even open usual counter services, for example, because of social distancing measures or lockdown measures, etc., they've had to find other ways to achieve, to give customers that same level of service, especially when you're dealing with maybe if a customer base that is not familiar with online tools or is not comfortable having these banking apps, for example. But how have organizations in your part of the world really responded to these expectations? Do you have they risen to the challenge, Caitlin?
Yeah, so 99 Designs has always been quite flexible in this kind of way, because we've had even our internal team split across lots of different countries, and so there's always been a little bit of give and take with that, and I think it's been really cool to see that evolve even more over the past year, and everyone have a little bit more empathy for the differences, which is good. I think all the things we were just talking about in the last question really fed into that too. One thing that I think has been playing on my mind a lot, especially in Australia, as we get back to normal, but you know what I mean, and we start having some people in the office and some people at home, is one thing that we grappled with before all this madness was when you have groups of some people in an office and some people dialing in, it just shifts the dynamic and the power balance a little bit, and so that can be quite challenging to deal with, and I think it's going to be something that a lot of people find more of, and in just ensuring that everybody has that seat at the table, like you were just saying, Alice, I think is going to be quite tough over the next few months. And again, I do not have the answer. We all used to dial in to Zoom calls individually, even if we were in the same office, so that everybody had the same platform and space. But I think that's definitely something that will be an extra challenge on top of a challenging year for us to come.
That's an interesting one, Caitlin, because I think just yesterday I was reading an interview with the Pfizer CEO, and he mentioned that, this is one of the things that has really seen a difference in terms of how people are working together. And going forward, even when we return to offices, I think he mentioned actually considering that everybody will continue to have screens in front of them, just to make sure that people are coming together, even when for those teams that are working from home, because that's one of the challenges pre-pandemic, right? We saw people when they work from home, they were far more likely to be talked over if they remained on a Zoom call compared to those that were present, or just neglected in some way. And part of that whole thing is really just inclusion in terms of technology and making sure that everybody is heard equally, literally by the volume. So in this case, Alice, do you have anything to add about these employee and customer expectations?
Yeah, from customers, and again, I guess we refer to them as stakeholders, but it's meant a lot more of an iterative approach to our work and reform, because there is an expectation that they can be involved now at every step of the way, because those conversations are happening online. So that's been interesting to adjust to, and we're probably still working through that, because that will be definitely the way forward for our organisation, even if we do return to a hybrid model of office work and working from home. From an internal perspective, I guess, there was always that concern at the beginning about productivity and how we're going to make sure that we're getting what we need. And it's been fascinating to see that the delivery of work has really outputs, and I hate that word, but have very much improved, if not stayed the same, if not improved. And so I guess from our perspective, it's more about having the conversations around outcomes and opportunities, rather than each step of the way being prescriptive about how we get there. And so I think staff have really appreciated having that flexibility. You don't have to necessarily clock on and clock off, as long as we get to where we need to at the end, and that's been really good. But again, very much a work in progress.
No, absolutely. And I suspect that we will continue to see this change even as new tools come on. That's one of the topics that I've seen organizations start discussing, is really, prior to this, your employee experience was very much something that you could create in a physical space. You designed beautiful buildings. People got over Google Offices. I know every one of us has probably seen those photos of those literal playgrounds that they have almost inside their offices. But what do you do when it's a remote workforce? It's a completely different challenge. How do you still create cultures that people want to be a part of and continue to really play a part in and engage in when you're remote and not necessarily in that environment. But Judy, how about things over in the radio side of things? Are you seeing any differences? I know that your stakeholders are, somewhat different, not necessarily the traditional ideas of stakeholders that we might have in our organizations, but have you seen any shifts in expectations at all? And is there any any stories to tell us?
I don't have any stories. I mean, we're a fairly small organization, so we've come back to the office quite quickly. I think, a lot of the radio stations, they had to broadcast from home studios during the lockdown. And I think, particularly people in Melbourne had to do that for a longer period of time. So, I think there was just a lot of relief when people could come back together just for that sense of community.
Yeah, exactly. Especially more so, I feel, with smaller teams, just because there's, for example, a tool like Donut, which Caitlin mentioned, and I am so tempted and eager to try, may not work as well when it's a much smaller team, just because, you have a smaller number of people who are online at any point in time. So to get matched in your schedules becomes a little trickier. But in regards to now, we shift a little bit and wonder about, for example, traditional media and the role that they might play in the future, because even as we go forward, there's so much focus on news at the moment. And, we know about what's going on, for example, with Facebook in Australia and the news sources and we'll just leave that one aside for now. But we'll start with traditional media. Caitlin, what role do you see them playing?
Look, I think obviously it's tricky, and I think it's a shifting landscape for sure. I think it's interesting. I was talking about with one of my team the other day that this is the first sort of global crisis where everyone has had the internet, which just has resulted in this flood of information that you were talking about, which I think has just overwhelmed us all. But I think even the things like the Facebook saga aside, and the Edelman report that you guys were talking about earlier, and the fact that the media trust is up again this year, which I was surprised about, I think it will change. And I think that we're still kind of cycling through and we'll land on different priorities for different times, essentially, which is a very fluffy answer, but I think no one knows.
I don't think anyone knows either. And those who do are probably trying to figure out the best way forward. Judy, what about you?
Yeah, I think we're just dealing with a lot of continuing fragmentation. I think the main media type will always be, who we pitch to, because we're for the mass reach and the mass audience, but then also having a lot of different tools and in our backpack as communicators, where we might think of a cheap way to create a video for YouTube, or, get someone to be on a podcast for Media Week, or, whatever we a pitch, we have to just think about, where's the audience? How can we reach them in different ways?
Yeah. Well, I think that's an interesting bit about the tools in our backpacks. I'm wondering I'll start with Alice. How has your own corporate communications approach really evolved since the beginning of the pandemic? Are there any tools that you found yourself consistently relying on? Not tools in the sense of, necessarily digital channels or, little handy technology devices or anything like that, but really your approach. Have you seen it shift?
Oh, for sure. We've certainly moved away from that routine generic communication, out to the masses kind of style approach of communicating, and very much tailoring the messages for our audiences depending on their location. Again, based in Melbourne, we're still working from home and have for 11 months and had some significant periods in lockdown, which is a very different experience to a lot of the people around other states in Australia. And so making sure that the way we frame our message is not our point of reference, but perhaps the that experience of our counterparts interstate. And I guess the other key thing in terms of our approach, we've just very much invested in stakeholder engagement and digital comms expertise, like in housing those skills as soon as we could. So to very much upskill the organisation so that we can make sure that we respond to the needs of our stakeholders going forward, because the way we do things is certainly not going to change, even if we do return to, like I said, that hybrid model of work going forward.
Right. Ladies, I cannot believe how quickly time has passed. And seeing as how we're in the last 2 to 3 minutes, I would like us to wrap up probably on, something that the audience can take away from this session. And let's take on that seat at the table. We know that this is a topic that has come up a couple of times, to put it mildly. But in the pandemic, we really saw how many people really gained a seat at the table, and the questions have now come on what needs to be done to retain it. Caitlin, would you like to start us off on this last question?
Yeah. So I think one thing that's most important to remember is that, what worked communications wise when we were kind of in this wartime mentality and in crisis mode isn't sustainable or necessary either. It would kill us all. But I think it is important that we remember that, supporting exec leaders as they kind of continue to navigate all the change that's going to happen is sort of our responsibility to keep pushing through, and it won't necessarily happen by itself. So I think, proactivity is key.
All right, succinct. I like it. Alice?
Oh, I agree. Just to echo Caitlin's words, I think a lot of agencies have relied on their comms team to be a bit of a pulse check for the organisation, and remote working has meant that they can't, execs can't necessarily walk the floor and get that anecdotal feedback. So, and many people are reluctant to give that feedback online. So it's just important to maintain that advisory role and bridging the gap so that leaders respond and are sensitive and informed in the way that they respond as we sort of transition out of crisis mode, for want of a better word.
Perfect. And Judy, can you wrap us up on this?
I think in a lot of ways we're the Department of Common Sense. So it's just, and what we do seems to be instinctive to us. But it's not instinctive to other departments necessarily. So I think it's a matter of just explaining, communicating what we do more frequently, being willing to say no, and just sort of explaining the public reactions, I think, and take the risk of commenting on things that aren't necessarily the domain of communications.
Got it. Well, that's it. We are right on time. I thank you each for participating in this conversation today. I've really enjoyed myself. Thank you so much, everyone. And from here, we're actually going to go into a morning break. So it's time for some coffee. But I'll catch everyone back right after the break. Thanks again, Alice, Judy, Caitlin. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.